guys, it's Courtney and welcome to day number 1 of my 25 Days of Christmas card series. Today I'm going to be using the Toasty Greeting stamp set by MFT. You can see that I have my masks cut here as well as a piece of Inkadinkado masking paper that I cut the bottom portion out with a circle die. And I'm just going to line that up on the bottom portion of my card panel, kind of in the centered the best I can anyway, and kind of just trace that with a pencil very lightly, and this will give me a guide as to where I need to stamp my images. So I'm going to go ahead and bring out my mini MISTI here just to make my stamping just a little bit easier. Some of these images are fairly large. I love the larger images that MFT has. And I'm going to stamp them one at a time because some of these areas are going to overlap a little bit. So I placed my mask down just to make sure that everything is going to fit the way I want it to. I'm going to start off with this little fire here. This is a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock cut down to an A2 size card. And I'm stamping with Blackout ink by Ink on 3 because it is a Copic safe ink. So I went ahead and stamped that down. And I'm masking this out with Simon Says Stamp masking paper. Now my ink pad is a little dry. I have a refill on its way, but it is a little dry. So I am stamping most of these images twice. Now this one snowman, this larger snowman here, is holding a stick with marshmallows on it. Now when I cut my masks, I did not try to even cut this area out at all. They are very teeny tiny and the very edge of the stick is actually just a solid line. So obviously you can't cut that mask. So when I cut the mask, I just cut around his little mitten. And then in order to mask those areas out, I'm actually going to use liquid Frisket. I'm also going to use that on the tips or the pom-poms of their hats. I believe they're called pom-poms, I believe. But I'm masking the rest out with that Simon Says Stamp masking paper. And you can also see that some of my image or a portion of my images are going beyond that circle. And I'm okay with that. It kind of adds a little extra interest to the card. So both of these large snowmen are going to hang out of this little circle just a little bit. Now for this next larger snowman, he's not holding anything. There is a stamp in this stamp set that is just the stick with the marshmallows that you could certainly put in his hand, but I just left this plain because they're going to overlap anyway. Now I tore his little scarf there by accident, so I kind of just fit that in place and masked out the rest of that. And here I'm going to take that liquid Frisket. So when you have this liquid Frisket, no matter what brand you use, you're not going to want to shake it. You're going to kind of want to twirl the jar or twirl the bottle a little bit because that will prevent the air bubbles. And take a very inexpensive paintbrush. These paintbrushes are the ones that are like $5 for $2 at the craft store because this is the only thing you're really going to be able to use it for. Even though you clean it immediately, it kind of cakes on a little bit and you'll just want to use it until you can't use it anymore and then just toss it. So I'm just filling in the little stick as well as the marshmallow. Let that dry for a couple of minutes. And then I'm going to stamp this last image here, which is this little penguin right there in the back. And he is going to overlap those little marshmallows a little bit. I'm also going to use the liquid Frisket for the stick and the marshmallows that the little penguin is holding as well. And again, you want to make sure that you clean your paintbrush right away and you let this dry for about, you want to give it at least 2 or 3 minutes depending on how thick you put the liquid Frisket on. And I did definitely go out of the lines and I'm okay with that. I can fix up those areas later. So once that was dry, I am going to go ahead and erase my pencil lines, the ones that are showing anyway. The ones underneath the masks, I can still see enough where I can line up this large mask from this Inkadinkado masking paper. And I'm going to line it up the best I can right over those pencil lines that are kind of showing through some of those masks. So for our ink blending, I am going to mask out just the bottom portion of my little mini scene here with some Post-it note tape, and this will be where my snow is. For my sky, I'm going to be using some Distress Oxide inks. I am using Blueprint Sketch, Dusty Concord, and Chipped Sapphire. And I'm going to be using some of the Blending Buddy brushes by Trinity Stamps. You can use a regular ink blending tool or a makeup brush, whatever you have in your stash. So I'm going to start with the Blueprint Sketch and just add that right along the mask from my Post-it note tape. then add the Dusty Concord directly on top of that. And then I'm saving the very top for that Chipped Sapphire, which is a really, really dark navy blue. I'm going to work my way all the way up to the top of my little circle, and then I'm going to work my way back down and make sure that these colors actually blend. My first time around, I don't worry about the blend. I just want to make sure that I have enough room for all three of these colors. And then when I work my way back down, that's when I worry about getting these colors to blend. And this color combination makes a really pretty night sky scene, and they blend beautifully together. So once I was happy with the blend that I got, I am going to add a little bit of either snow or stars, whatever you want to make this be. And I'm just going to be using some shimmer spray. You want to make sure that you shake this up really good. I kind of tap the end or the bottom of the bottle onto my palm and make sure all of that sparkly stuff is in the liquid, I guess. Taking the nozzle and just sprinkling that on, letting that sit for just a couple of seconds, and then dabbing that up with a paper towel. And this will remove the moisture, but keep behind the sparkle. I am going to very carefully remove the Post-it note tape, being careful not to remove the masks of my images themselves. And I wanted to add just a little bit of shading on the snow area so that that circle kind of continues. And when I remove that larger mask, it doesn't end on that top portion where my sky is. So I'm going to take a little bit of the Weathered Wood Distress Oxide ink and another one of my Blending Buddy brushes. And the reason why I like these brushes is you can see they kind of come to a point. So I'm just adding a teeny tiny bit on either side of this circle mask. And this will just add a little bit of shading and kind of close in that circle a little bit. And with that pointed brush, you can kind of get into those little teeny tiny areas, even though a lot of these areas are covered up with those images and those masks. So once that was done, I am going to very carefully remove the outer, or my circle mask, I guess, but I'm leaving the masks on the images themselves until my Distress Oxide dries. And this takes about 5 minutes or so. Once those masks are saturated, sometimes they will tear the paper. The Inkadinka Dew masking paper is not that tacky, so I was okay removing that portion. After they are dry, I like to take the tip of my scissors to kind of get those masks started, because that saturation from the paper is going to seep right into those masks. So you want to just be super careful when you are removing these. As far as where the liquid Frisket is, you can either take an eraser, or I just take my finger and kind of just rub that area off, the liquid Frisket off with my finger, and you can see that I definitely went out of the lines. But like I said, I will fix that later. So next we're going to move on to the Copic coloring. Oh, first I erased my pencil lines. Once you color over them, can't get rid of them. So for the snowmen themselves, I am using some cool gray markers. I want these to appear white, but they will still have some shading. So my light source is obviously my fire. So for this particular snowman, my shading is going to be to the left-hand side, the furthest away from that fire. My darkest color is the C5, and I'm using that pretty sparingly. I'm extending those areas out with the C3, then the C1, and then finally the C00, just to kind of get that to fade to white, and I kind of get rid of those flick lines. And then I'm taking a very light yellow, and I'm just adding a teeny tiny bit of this in the areas that are closest to the fire. And this will kind of be the reflection that the fire has on this image, or on this snowman. So next I am going to go ahead and color this next snowman here, and I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm using the same exact color combination, but I'm adding my shading to the opposite side because the fire's in the center. So now his shading, or his highlight, I guess you could say, is going to be to the left side of him. So I'm using the same grays, and then I'm going to finish off with that really light yellow on just the left-hand side where that reflection of the fire would be cast onto this little snowman. So for the penguin, I am going to switch over to some warm grays now, and there's not going to be too much of a reflection on him. He's kind of standing behind the fire. For his face, the black areas of his face, I'm just going to go in solid with a W7. There's not too much of an area to do any shading there, so I'm not going to worry about that. I am adding a little bit of shading to the rest of his body underneath where his scarf is hanging on the rest and off to the right-hand side just because he's kind of faced off to the left. Blending that out with the W5, W3, and I'm also going to use the W3 to add my shading to the white areas of my penguin. So I'm just going to add a little shading to the bottom part of, or the top part of his face where his hat's hanging over and underneath his scarf. And then blend those areas out with the W1 and extend those white or those shaded areas of the white areas out. Now this is the lightest W marker that I have. So to get rid of those flick lines and to have more seamless blend, I'm going to quickly go over those areas with a colorless blender, and this will kind of get rid of those flick lines. I'm going to add a little bit of that light yellow to the bottom portion of his face and his little body for that reflection. For the snowman's little carrot noses, as well as the beak and feet of the penguin, I'm just going to use two different orange markers. There's not really too much shading that needs to be done in these areas. You can probably even go in with just one color. And next, we're going to move on to the coloring of their little jackets or coats and scarves and hats. And I'm going to basically use the same color combinations for both snowmen and the penguin, but I'm just going to basically do the opposite. So I'm starting off with his coat, and this one is going to be green as well as his hat. I'm going in with the lightest green and just mapping out those darkest areas. Now remember, the left side is furthest away from the fire, so that's going to be the darkest area. So for the G28, which is my darkest color, I'm going to add that shading to the left-hand side, and I'm also going to create shadows where his one arm is hanging over the rest of his body. There would also be a shadow where his hat is kind of folded over or curved over. So you can see I just put an extra little flick line there. Going to extend these areas out a little bit further with the G46, then the G24, and then finishing off with the greens with that G21, which is the one that we started with to map out all of these dark areas. Now I want there to be a reflection on his jacket or his coat as well, just as the same as it would be on the snow or on his body, I guess you could say. So I'm going to keep that yellow marker out throughout this entire card. And because the yellows and the greens blend very nicely together, I didn't have a problem with adding this yellow on the right-hand side of his coat. So I'm going to get these colors to blend really nicely, and this will kind of be this reflection. It doesn't really look right now, but once everything is colored, I promise it'll all come together. Now for the red, I'm going to use my favorite red combination, but once again, starting off with that lightest color to map out those darkest areas. So again, the shadows would be off to the left-hand side. Now his scarf there's like a little fold in it, and it is part of the illustration. So I just added a little bit of a flick line with that darkest color, and we'll extend that out each and every time just to add a little bit of texture or a little bit of shape to that scarf. And it is already part of the illustration, so there's no guesswork. It's there for you, and it's there to guide you as far as where to put your shadows. So going to go ahead and finish off with that R22. Again, this is the one that we started with, and I want to add this reflection back. So you can see that I'm leaving a little bit of white space here for that yellow marker. Now, yellow and red is not really going to blend that well together, especially being the yellow is so light, but it will add that reflection. So you don't have to necessarily worry about the colors blending perfectly. Now, I did forget about this little edge of his or end of his scarf over here, so I went in with those same reds. No reflection on this part. This is pretty far away from the actual fire. So for his belt here, I am just going to add some black marker as well as the C markers, the darker C markers, C7. Same thing for his little buttons. And I am going to leave a little bit of a highlight off to the right-hand side closest to the fire. So I'm just adding a little bit of a C, basically, with the C7. C with the C7 off to the left-hand side, and then just extend that little C mark out with a C5 and then the C3. So for the white areas of his coat and his hat, I'm going to go back to the same colors I used for the snowman themselves. Now this is going to kind of blend in with the snowman the way we have it now. But I don't really have any other grays besides the warm grays and the cool grays, and warm grays don't necessarily look right for white objects, in my opinion. So I am going to do this shading the same exact way as I did with the snowman, keeping that shadow off to the left-hand side. And once all my coloring is done, I'm just going to add some shimmer to these white areas to kind of differentiate between these areas and the snowmen themselves. So I'm not really too concerned about it right now, but I am adding that yellow highlight off to the right-hand side for each one. Now I colored the outfit for the other snowman as well as the penguin the same way. I just did it in reverse. So the other snowman will have a a red coat and a green scarf. So for the little sticks, I'm just going to go in solid with a E37. I'm not worried about doing any shading here whatsoever. I did forget about this little piece of the scarf here for this little penguin. I was missing things all over the place with this card. And I'm going to use the E30 markers for the stones that are around the fire. So I'm going to go right in with that darkest color, and I'm just going to add a little bit of shading where one stone or one rock is behind another. It really doesn't matter, guys, to be quite honest with you. Nobody's going to know the difference. Just as long as you have some variation in color, it's going to look fantastic. Just going to blend that out with the E33 and then finish off with the lightest color, that E31, for the highlight portion of the rocks. Now for the fire itself, I am going to, well, first I colored the little marshmallows with the W1 and added a little reflection on that too. But for the fire, I'm going to be using 3 different colors. And you can see that each of these colors end with the 7, which means they're going to blend nicely together. I'm going to start off with the red in the center portion of the fire and then move on to the orange and just blend those areas out a little bit further. And then I'm going to finish off with the yellow for just the edges of the fire. I did go back in with that red just to kind of darken those areas up a little bit, but you can see that these 3 colors blend beautifully together and it kind of gives a little bit of dimension to the fire itself. So once that was done, we are going to add some shadows to these objects so they're not kind of just floating there in the snow. I'm going to bring out a V25 marker and just add a little bit of a shadow underneath the fire, underneath each one of the snowmen and the penguin. And I'm just being careful not to go beyond where that circle would be. And I'm going to extend those areas out with the V22, then finish off with the V20. And again, I don't want to have these harsh lines from where it turns from the V20 to the white area of the card panel. So I'm going to take my colorless blender and quickly go over those areas to kind of give this more of a seamless blend and get rid of those flick lines that we've already created. So once all of my coloring was done, I am going to go ahead and fix up these white outlines that we have where I didn't mask all that great. So I'm taking a Copic marker that closely matches my background, and I'm just barely touching the tip of the marker to the paper because these colors are not going to be perfect. I don't want this to be too noticeable. As long as you just barely touch the paper, nobody will ever know the difference. I'm adding some white gel pen details to some random areas pretty much away from the fire. I like to add my white gel pen to the darkest areas because I think it stands out a little bit more. And I also had a red little dot there from where I took off the cap of my marker. Just added a little bit of white gel pen there too to cover that up. Here's where I'm taking a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen to add some sparkle to all of those white areas on their little outfits to make this kind of stand out from the rest of the snowman. So next I am going to go ahead and fix up this scuff that I have in the top left-hand corner. I don't know whether you guys can see it, but there is a giant scuff. I don't know what it's from. It's probably, honestly, from my nail polish. But in order to take this away, I am going to use a sand eraser. And when you're using a sand eraser, you want to start off with very light pressure. You're going to have to go over it several times, but if you add too much pressure, you're just going to tear your paper. So just go over it several times with a very light hand, and you'll be able to take that scuff up. Also going to fix up this little area that kind of went beyond the circle, and it's probably from that shimmer spray. Going to finish off the card with my sentiment. This is from the same stamp set. I did use my Misty because I want to make sure that it's straight. I am stamping this twice with VersaFine Onyx Black ink to make this really stand out on that dark background. And that is it. That is it for card number 1 of my 25 Days of Christmas card series. I will leave all of the supplies listed in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.